Hello. That's a bright light. If you please take your seats now, thanks. Standing room only. Sit down there.
They have a clock here, so Fernando doesn't have to care about that.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the official launch of the Open Data Working Group. My name is Steve Walker. I'm from Canada. I'm the country co-chair, along with my co-chair.
My name is José Alonso. I'm the civil society co-chair of the working group on behalf of the Web Foundation and the Global Open Data Initiative. Welcome and thanks for coming.
Yes. Thank you. Today we're going to set the stage for the work of the Open Data Group going forward, and we're really excited to get started, so let's get going.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naser Faruqui. I'm the Director of Science and Innovation for the International Development Research Center, which supports science in developing countries. And we're currently supporting the Web Foundation in its Open Data in Developing Countries project, which is looking at case studies across 15 countries in terms of the benefits and the challenges of open government data. So I'd like to welcome the panelists who are going to explore in this session the status of open government data and to talk how we might move faster to close the gap between rhetoric and reality. And I'm delighted to have such an impressive set of panelists. My daughter was saying to me, Daddy, you're going to miss Halloween this year. So I do want to wish everybody happy Halloween. And I said, yes, well, there might not be any tricks, but we certainly are going to have a treat with the type of panelists that we have. And so the first panelist to my left really needs no introduction. We are lucky enough to have Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is, of course, the inventor of the World Wide Web. He's the founding director of the Web Foundation, which was launched to further the potential of the web to benefit. And he's promoted open government data globally. He's a member of the UK Transparency Board, and he's a president of the London Open Data Institute. To his left, we have Secretary Edwin Lacierda, who's the presidential spokesman for the President of the Philippines, and he's an incumbent member of the cabinet for the Philippines. And before joining the government, I found quickly through Wikipedia that he practiced law and convened an organization of civil society groups working on transparency and accountability in government. So you've worked on both sides of government and civil society. To his left, we have Mr. Kwaku Ofosu-Darkwa, who's the Chief Director for the Minister of Communications of Ghana. He's also the Secretary for the Steering Council for the Open Data Institute in Ghana. And Minister Omane Boama sends his regrets. He was unfortunately unable to attend, but we're delighted to have Mr. Adarkwa with us today. And finally, last, but certainly not least, we have Professor Beth Novak, who's the director of the Governance Lab, which aims to improve people's lives by changing how we govern advances in science and technology. She's a visiting professor at the New York University Graduate School of Public Service, as well as the MIT Media Lab. And she also served as the first deputy chief technology officer for the United States and was the founding director of the White House Open Government Initiative between 2009 and 2011. So let me briefly outline the structure of this session for you. Sir Tim is going to give us a 15-minute highlight of the global progress towards open data goals, talking about the Open Data Barometer. Secretary Lacerda and Mr. Adarpo are going to outline in about 10 minutes each, please, the status of open data initiatives in their respective countries and reflect on opportunities and challenges. And then Professor Novak is going to take 10 minutes as a discussant. So to think about the previous presentations and give us her insights on these issues, to highlight lessons learned and some of the unknowns in this space. And we'll run through the presentations without question and answer to sort of stay on time, but then at around 10 after 3, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session with all of you to allow for full participation. So panelists, I do want to please remind you that we need to finish in an hour, so please be concise, stick to your time limits. I have a colleague who's sitting in the front who's going to put on his Halloween mask when we get to 3 minutes, and is going to take out his Halloween bag when we get to 1 minute. So give you the warning. So without further ado, Sir Tim.
Thank you. Should I go up there? I don't know whether it needs to. I stand up, but I go down a step, so I don't know whether you can see me better or worse. So, but thank you all for coming, especially those who are missing being with your children on Halloween. Or maybe you got that as an advantage or something, I don't know. But I will briefly, I've been asked to put this in context. So this open data, if you like, the context is open and the context is data. For me, I suppose the open started with the World Wide Web, which is almost 25 years old. And that really has been explosion of openness in two senses. Open, what really makes the web work is the open standards, it's interoperability, the fact that every computer can talk to any other computer, the languages, the computer languages they use, HTML and HTTP, are common and shared. And so that is that technical basis of the openness of the standards makes the World Wide Web work. And then what it produced was an openness of people sharing information. Really important it was for me early on to separate those, in that you can put things on the web but protect them if they should be private. So it's reasonable to use the web for things which are not open. And of course, when you talk to people about data, then also you'll have to, perhaps within your organizations, within your governments, in your countries, remember to point out that just because you're trying to get them to use technology and to put the data out there, there will be some data which they will need to keep private because it's personal data, or because it's planning data, which is what you've decided not to make public. But the open, in the sense of open access, it's free. Open in the sense there's an open government license on this, which means you can do anything with it. You can use for commercial purposes. You can use it for non-commercial uses, etc. You can repurpose it. That openness is really important for open government data. And by far the bulk of the data you will come across, should be open, and there's no excuse for putting it out there. So there's two forms of openness, and the web has been this wave of openness. A few years ago, 2009, I realized at the beginning of the year that there was something missing, that we had all this interoperable data, but documents, but there's so many documents were based on data and we didn't have the data. And to actually be able to use it, if you're the person who can use a computer, can use a spreadsheet, maybe and you're looking at a report, or maybe your kid doing homework, and you see a report which has got almost what you need, the data you need, and you can't but just go behind the graph, the pretty graph in the report, and find the data, pull it in, and then draw your own conclusions. It's boring, not so interesting, not so powerful, but B, it means it stops the serendipity which comes with linking. When a kid or a journalist or somebody in the government takes a piece of data from one area and they connect it to a piece of data from another area, that is the exciting bit. So it's linking, both just as on the web. The only reason why the documents on the web are exciting is because they link to other things. When you make data, yes, there's great value in putting the data out there at all, but actually later on it's really important to be able to link it together. So one of the reasons why, if you're in a department, you should always put that you should put the data out there on the web. Before you go to the trouble of making a website, is your website will be an introduction to your data, and it will only give your data, and so it will only give a certain amount of insight. When you put the data out there and let other people use it, they will connect it to all kinds of other data. So that openness, in the sense of linkable, is also really important. So there's these waves of open, and a wave since 2009. There's been this wonderful wave of people moving to data. At first, some of the executives at Google said, nope, for us, it's always going to be text. Data, no, you can't rely on data people put on the web. But then, bit by bit, you can see inside the Google search engine even, it's all based on data. They have a Google knowledge graph. They bought Freebase. They're curating a massive amount of data about the relationships between things. That's why when you search for things on Google now, even though they don't export a lot of that graph to you, but they use it internally, and you can see you get a box down the side. So there's this move to data, to open. There's move to data. Now with open data, what's been brilliant, of course, what happened in the UK was we got a project initially within the Cabinet Office to put a lot of data online quickly, and then soon after that they founded the Open Data Institute, and the Open Data Institute has just been running for 1 year, and during that year, I must say, even I was amazed, as one of the co-founders with Nigel Shadbolt, who may be in the room as well, to see the things that the ODI folks have done. There was, in fact, a whole seminar that some of you might have been to yesterday, day before yesterday, a summit in which they brought together a lot of the people that they're working with, which was very exciting. I want to mention just one thing that has been done by a combination of in fact, the joint project between the foundation, the World Wide Web Foundation, and the Open Data Institute, and that is the Open Data Barometer. If you want to promote something, if you want to help people figure out what they should do next, there's nothing like giving them a number which tells them how well they're doing. And so the Open Data Barometer has just been released. If you Google it, those of you with laptops, if the net holds up, then you can Google for Open Data Barometer and find it. You can download the report, which is in PDF, and has got pictures. All the data is online. There is a PDF copy of it for those of you who need to print it. But it's all online interactively as well, of course. You'll be pleased that behind this PDF, you can, of course, click through and you can download all the data yourself, and you can see how the index was put together. Some of you, so who had heard of the Open Data Barometer before this talk? Quite a lot of you probably been asked to help create it. So that was maybe, for the record, about 20% of the people in the room. Who had heard of the web index before this talk? Some more of you need to know about both, but the web index is something that the Web Foundation did initially a year ago, and it's just about to come out with a second year soon in November. So the launch of the web index. The web index is generally a number drawn out from lots and lots and lots of different numbers and questions and surveys to try to put a number on how well is your country doing exploiting the web, getting the best use of it, using it properly, and so it in a way does on a wider scale what the Open Data Barometer does for open data. And of course, what's great is we can take the Open Data Barometer numbers and they're being fed into the web index. So when you get a good Open Data Barometer score, it will help your web index. The Open Data Barometer, now the web index, it was easy for me to talk about because the UK didn't come at the top. I have to say that the folks in the ODI who are based in the UK, they found that the UK did actually come out top on the Open Data Barometer. And they checked to see whether this was robust, whether just by tweaking the index a little bit we could make the UK come out number 2. Couldn't. Sorry, it's solidly at the top. You would have had to very much twist the... Now, that does not mean, if you're working with the UK government, by the way, that UK, in fact, it comes up with a number like 97. That's because it's normalized, and if you're top, you get 97. That does not mean that the UK is 97% of the way there at all. In fact, the UK might maybe, it's 20% of the way there we're putting all the open data. And the UK has got some serious challenges. UK has not got, there's no open data way of taking an address with a postcode and turning it into a latitude and longitude, which is the sort of thing you immediately want to do if you want to put customer data on a map. There's basic conversion from addresses to maps is one of the core things that you link through. But there are other things the UK does have. It has schools, hospitals, geographic regions, and companies, importantly, all have identifiers. And you've heard the Prime Minister make an announcement today that the companies will be linked to exactly who owns them, which is going to be, which I think a lot of people are very excited about. So the UK has got a lot of infrastructure, and I think people are moving now from thinking about how are we going to do our open data to realize they should say, how are we going to do our open data infrastructure, and that we're going to put together a whole bunch of stuff, which is not just lots of data, but lots of data which starts to link up. So if you've got an identifier for a school and you've got data about the school, it actually uses those identifiers. And on the web, in 5-star data, it uses URIs, so you can immediately click through and everything links. So I've got a few minutes left, but so I recommend that you go to the Open Data Barometer itself. I won't read the whole thing to you. I remember to renormalize it. Remember that when it comes out next year, it will have different things in it. Maybe it'll have the address file in. So if you're, it will be adjusted so that at any point it really tries to make a number which rewards you. So you will get slightly higher mark in the Open Data Barometer if you solve the next most important problem for your country. And in some cases, apparently, we didn't put the postcode translation on because some countries actually don't have postcodes. But some people, people are in very different states of development with this. But hopefully, there will be a part of the subject within the barometer which rewards the most important thing you have to do next. And as you get that done, you feel you can sort of claim victory on those stages, then you can work on to make sure that you've got all the other things. Some of the most important data sets, that you've got a good environment for people, for entrepreneurs to use the data and set up new companies using the data, so on. You've got ways for those developers who will talk to each other and give you feedback. You've got ways of getting feedback back to the original data and so on. So there's a lot to do. There's a massive agenda. So, but to all the people who've worked on that, I'd like to say thanks, good job for actually putting this the Open Data Barometer together. I think it's really an important part of the puzzle. It's a good snapshot of where we are now, and I'd say go there, Google Open Data Barometer, pull it out and download all the data, and do good stuff with it. Join it up. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sir Tim. I think that downloads of the barometer must be rising as we're speaking. Secretary Naser, can I ask you to make some brief remarks about the status of open government data in the Philippines?
Thank you. Good afternoon. We were just asked to share to this group the challenges that beset the Philippines when we were pushing our open data. Just to give you where we came from. In 2009, our then president was running as Senator Aquino was running for president. And the previous administration was beset with graft and corruption. Institutions were damaged. Government institutions the public distrust for government institutions were really low. And so we ran on the platform. I was then the campaign spokesperson for Senator Aquino. So we were running on the platform of transparency and accountability and good governance. So when we when President Aquino became president, part of the impetus was to join OGP. In fact, our representative is Secretary Butchabad, who unfortunately couldn't come because we're in the process of approving our budget. But our thrust to open data and to open governance was there because that was a campaign promise. So we wanted to push for open governance, transparency, and accountability were our mantra in the way we ran government. And so we put up a number of reforms that we came in. We've put our government budget on the website. People can see our website. But we felt that it wasn't good enough. There are only separate institutions which are putting out data in the internet. So in 2012, we attended the World Bank Conference on Open Data. And after that, World Bank decided to come in and help the Philippines in developing its open data. What we didn't realize was World Bank was working disparately. It was helping one agency, it was helping another agency, it was helping another agency. They weren't coordinated together. When we realized, after attending that conference, when we realized that there was so much input or encouragement from World Bank to do open data, we figured out we need to come up with a coordinated scheme where all agencies could work together. And when we decided to go and work together to coordinate all the agencies, and I was tasked to be the main coordinator for open data, we recognized there's so many challenges. For one, there's a culture of opaqueness in our country. Coming from a government, 10 years of graft and corruption, government bureaucrats were not willing to share data. That's one of the big problems that we had. There was opaqueness. You ask for data, it won't be released. Another problem also that we had was that government was selling data. If you want census data, you have to pay for census data. If you want to ask for a map, you have to pay for the map. So there are vested interests also. Some government corporations, or rather private corporations, would try to compile all this data and then sell it to the public. So there were a lot of vested interests on that point. On the part of government bureaucrats also, there was a fear of getting flack if you put out data, which is wrong. And a number of them were not vetted, a number of them were not curated, a number of them were not verified, owing to the fact that there was no culture of openness during the past administration. So when we came in, we pushed for open transparency and accountability. And so a number of problems also came up. We asked for where are the data that we can collect. It's all in paper. Everything was in paper. At most, they were also in PDF files, good for posting but not for sharing. And when we were asking for all this data, you wouldn't believe that just for this year. We asked for data for the past several years back, and we were given floppy disks. That's so you see the kind of culture that we had, the fear of being open, the fear of being transparent would lead to greater investigation by media, lead to greater awareness by the citizenry. And so thus there is a concern from the government side, should we put out data? But then we had, the advantage that we have is that we have executive sponsorship. The president was very keen on pushing data out in the open. Our budget secretary is one of the apostles or evangelists for open governance and open data. So, but then we realized also a number of things. We realized also that our digitization was not, the preparedness was in varying levels. We have some who wouldn't want to digitize. We have some who would be willing to do it, but there was also a lack of technical know-how. So those were the problems that we had. And also, we also had, a problem with us is that since we're in the process of digitizing, we don't have an accountable officer for each agency who's going to be accountable for presenting this data or putting out this data. So those were the concerns, as well as we realized that our government would have some codes or terms of references, but it turns out that those references, they don't speak to each other. There's no common vocabulary among agencies. For instance, if you say poverty, it would mean different from one agency to another agency. So we need to come up with a common vocabulary for all these terms in order for all the data to be harmonized. We're doing that right now. In fact, we have started to do it. In one way of letting all these agencies talk to each other is that we have established for each agency what we call an open data champion, where we meet, where we, World Bank, for instance, sponsored a boot camp for all these open data champions. And so we were able to come up with the same language. Our budget department is also one of the forefront proponents of open data. They hold the money. Part of it is to tell the agencies, if you don't give us the information we need, we won't give you the budget that you need. So there was also somehow forced to give us the data, but that is good. In and of itself, it has worked very well for us, but again, challenges remain. We need to have better coordination among our different agencies. Civil society is keen on learning what this is all about, And come November of this year, we're going to launch our open data in the Philippines. We're prepared to come out with around 300 data sets. We still have a lot of data sets, but we need to vet, we need to curate. We need to also hire more younger people who are open to new ideas, open to open data. And part of the problem also in our country is the bureaucracy we had a freeze hiring for some time. So we have an aging bureaucracy. But right now, the president has decided to open up the bureaucracy. So we're hiring more people who are open to new innovations, new ways of imparting data to the public. We're committed to do open data, regardless of whether who's going to be the head of the open data. It's a policy, it's a commitment from President Aquino for us. And we'd like to thank all those who spoke. When I attended Washington, Irina, I think you were one of them. And so it is very educational for us, but still we're in the process of learning. Moldova sent us some speakers to train us also in open data. That's why we're here. We've come here to learn also from the knowledge that you can impart. But challenges remain, but I know that we're getting there. And by November 26th, we're proud to let you know that we're going to launch open data in the Philippines. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Lacerda, and illustrating kind of the importance of diagnosing the problems before you jump into open data. Good. So, Mr. Adarkwa, may I ask you to come up, please, and talk to us about Ghana and what's happening there.
Good afternoon. I bring you compliments from my minister, who was highly desirous to be here. He sends his felicitation. Indeed, the participation of the Ministry of Communications in this program shows the importance of the government of Ghana in facilitating the process of developing open government, and for that matter, open data initiative. Ghana was fortunate to be part of the pilot project for the studies, and so we had the opportunity of establishing the partnership in Ghana in 2011 and also signed on to the Open Data Initiative. The development of infrastructure, and for that matter, the Ghana ICT for Accelerated Development Policy had set the pace to ensure that information flow and knowledge development is developed in Ghana without barriers, without geographic restriction. So that was actually the basis on which Ghana set itself the agenda to participate in the Open Government and Open Data Initiative. The strengths are there. And a forum such as this challenges us to demystify what open data is all about. We are challenged in Ghana, and we are very happy that in this forum here, we have our legislature participating in the parallel event. We have also the civil society participating in another event. This shows that we want to gather much more momentum to embrace all and sundry in the development of open data initiatives. On the part of government, some initiatives have started in the budget area. But from discussions that we held yesterday, it meant that we needed to do more. The information shared on the government information system on budget, it is not to be shared for government officials and government departments alone. What is important is for the civil society to know what is there, what is the funds being used for. So this is a challenge that we need to address. In Ghana, we are of the opinion that the full development of the initiative will aid administrative efficiency development in the country. And so as part of our approach, we are committed to building the community that would be assertive to the use of open data. At the moment, the talk is ongoing. where is the community? Yesterday at one of the syndicates, the question was raised that we must make sure that we don't build only systems and then leave the systems unused. That is a major challenge for us. We need to make sure that the systems that we are putting in place, Ghana is going to launch its portal by the close of the year. Is at the end? Where is the community? We need to emphasize on developing the community. This is the more reason why we have to look at the terrains that we are positioned in. In Ghana, for instance, we see the development of local content as very key. What if you have about 40% of the people who cannot understand or read English, but understand other vernacular, but cannot have access to that open document which is online? We need to emphasize the development of local content, and that's been a key effort. And so under an e-transform project that we have just initiated with the World Bank, we're going to build on these strengths, developing local content capability in the country, also ensuring that from the demand side, the community would be also sensitized to understand what is it that we're talking about when we mention open data. And so generally, the challenges have been identified, and for infrastructure, we have over 12,000 terabytes of fiber optic backbone landing on the coast of Ghana. In country, almost the whole country is being blanketed with broadband, and Ghana is one of the first countries which have made its broadband policy a universality policy. So broadband is now a universal access policy and should reach all parts. We have a mobile telephony subscription of over 110%. What should this translate to? It should only translate to knowledge. And the knowledge should be knowledge that will be shared by all. And so we see as a challenge also the support of government giving budgetary support, so that apart from donor support initiative, government itself will also support this initiative. And this is a key message that we've got from here as we interacted with other delegates yesterday. And so to sum up, what we notice is that open government requires a legislative backing. Not just legislative backing, but a workable one. So as I said, we are happy that our legislature is represented here. And it requires executive commitment, which the administration of Ghana is committed towards. And it requires the community to get it right, the community to understand it. And it requires institutional arrangement. That is where the issue of capacity development comes in. That is where we must ensure also that in implementing open government, we don't bring a divide. We all know the talk about digital divide. For open government, there should be no divide. So we must make emphasis, or place emphasis on the fact that the capacity development of those who will implement the process is well taken care of. And again, there should be no regional divide. Yesterday, a facilitator on capacity development raised that issue, which is very key. We must make sure that there's no regional divide in open government. So all regions must come on board to have the same concept, the same understanding. If regional divide comes in, then we are likely to face a problem. And so the way forward for Ghana is that we've formalized the development of our 2-year action plan, and the inputs that we've got here, we're going to ensure that under the e-transform project, a lot of attention is paid into developing pilot areas in education, in the judiciary, administration of justice, in the way parliament works, and then in the way e-immigration also works. These are areas that we want to make key: health, education, judiciary, immigration, to make sure that information flow on these platforms that we are creating will be shared by all. And also, finally, we want to ensure that the citizens will play active parts. The civil society will rather be marketing in support of government. This is an area where we need hybrid in approach. And I think we'll live here, going home, that we've come to belong to a community which sees the use of knowledge in development as key. And knowledge can only be got on open information sharing and knowledge sharing. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to Ghana to join in this discussion. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Adarkwa, and thanks also for emphasizing the importance of inclusion of local content and avoiding digital divides. So, Professor Novak, you have the fun part because you get to react. And so we'd be very pleased to hear your insights and your thoughts on the presentations that have come and bring in additional points, please.
Thank you very much. So I have to beg people's indulgence. As you can hear, I'm a little under the weather, but I'm so passionate about the topic that I think it will help me regain my strength and my voice to participate in this panel, and I want to thank you for having me today. A journalist asked me earlier why I'm excited about coming to the OGP and why I thought this was important. I think the OGP is very important as a celebratory moment where we come together in fellowship with now several thousand people, 61 countries who've signed on to these commitments. And for a brief moment, we get to pause and rejoice in the fact that open data especially is a movement, is clearly something that cannot be put back in the bottle, it seems. But as we've heard echoed from so many of the panelists, when we go back after 2 days of celebrating here in London, when we go back after having been at this fabulous launch event for the ODI, we go back from the fabulous civil society event that happened yesterday, where all of this energy took place, we have to remember it is not inexorable, it is not inevitable, and is not assured. And all of us, all of you, are the ones who are doing the very hard work of making this actually happen. I was just sent a news story in real time as I'm up here that the US Congress has challenged an attempt by our Securities and Exchange Commission, our financial regulator, to use open data standards. They want to roll back open data as it applies to public companies. This has now been pushed back against, but it is not assured. As we heard already, government bureaucrats, Secretary Lissierda explained to us, government bureaucrats are not always willing to share. There is still a very deep spread feeling that the taxpayer benefits when we sell the data that has been collected with taxpayer dollars. And it's hard for people to understand, often to really understand concretely why open data still matters. I think one of the other things that we've heard so much here and throughout is that accountability, increase in transparency, decrease in corruption is one very important reason why open data matters. But equally important is the problem solving, the more effective governance, the delivery of better services that are also become possible in parallel when we make open data available. And I think it's important to point out that this conference in particular brings together people from two very different communities, a transparency and good government world, if you will, and an innovation and a tech world, who come together to focus on their shared passion and enthusiasm for the power that data can bring, such as we heard from both of you, the release of spending data and how that can make us, again, decrease transparency, but also enable the better delivery of services. We heard a lot today about the importance of identifying the most important data sets. It is what someone said, a massive agenda to now go from the first phase of open data, where the goal is to get anything out or anybody to release anything. In the US, we started with 47 data sets that were just the loosest thing we could shake from the trees, to now focusing on how do we translate into real outcomes in specific sectors. We're here in England where the NHS is making a massive push to put out the whole country's data from its healthcare system in order to drive better provider accountability, better service efficiency, better patient choices and patient decision-making. But we have a long way to go to understand what works, to go from the promise of open data into the real delivery of solutions to real problems. We've heard a lot here about how the processes are hard. The principles we get. I think we can pat ourselves on the back that we've made a lot of progress in the principles, but implementation is difficult. In my home country, the United States, you are probably following in the press how our government is getting killed because we have passed a many thousand-page piece of legislation about healthcare reform, but because we have a website that doesn't deliver called healthcare.gov, we're getting really in trouble because the implementation is hard. And that's where the specific how-tos really matter. Another reason why OGP is so important. When Moldova is mentoring the Philippines, when we're hearing about the mentoring that we can give each other, the learning that we can provide on these specific how-tos of how to actually implement open data, what are those data standards, how do I build a data catalog, how do I surface my data, how do I make it searchable, data that exists in numbers, data that exists in text, how do I create a coalition of the willing, how do I engage with civil society, with businesses, with others to use the data. I think the working group is incredibly important, and I want to celebrate the fact that we've come together as a working group and that we'll continue progress as a working group in order to create that kind of mentored learning environment. I must add a plug here, I cannot resist, that we just launched a few minutes ago online the GovLab Academy at govlabacademy.org with a first module, a topic on data. It's a set of videos, readings, curated resources to help people who want to use open data know how to do so in practice. And we look forward to collaborating with the working group to make these kinds of resources and mentoring opportunities scalable, to translate what we're learning in Ghana, what we're learning in the Philippines, into resources that are available to anybody who wants to experiment with and try open data and figure out how open data can help to drive real solutions to problems. Building the community ultimately is the hard part. It's not just about, Tim has outlined for us so many difficult technical challenges, but I think far surpassing the technical challenges, which thankfully we have people like you to work on, and people like the World Wide Web Foundation to help us tackle, is building the community of activists, of companies, of citizens, of partners, who can help us use the data and create the apps with it, create the tools with it, can also do the research on understanding how the data translates into outcomes, developing the metrics for understanding what works. And I would point out, importantly at this stage, helping to gather data. I learned in my last panel about the concept of factivism, not hacktivism, but factivism. These are the citizen scientists who go out to gather data, at least that's how I understood it, to help fill in the missing gaps and help us in Pakistan to gather the real data on the ground about the incidence of dengue fever, as The Economist reported, so that we can go from 400 deaths to 0 in the course of a year, so that in post-Fukushima Japan, we have citizens engaged in gathering the data about nuclear radiation levels, or in the US, the fracking levels that the public labs is tracking by engaging citizens in the process of gathering data and collaborating with government to combine that data together to make it useful to all of us. Finally, we've heard from everybody on the panel the common refrain: we need to do more. We heard an example about budget data. We heard lots of technical examples about the way we're starting to do something, but we can all do more to advance from the principles of open data to the practices of open data to real solutions to problems, to translate this innovation in governance, this tool, and it really is just a tool, open data, into solutions and that creative solutions that help improve real people's lives, whether it's with regard to healthcare or education, whether it's with regard to transportation or government accountability. We can all do more, and I am thrilled that this working group is going to help us to get there. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Professor Novak, and also for reminding us that when we finish celebrating that we all have to go back and roll up our sleeves and keep working on this and help each other work on it. So let's open up this session now to participation from all of you. I can tell that there's some people who don't want to say anything, but we have literally sitting room only crowd here. I inherited this group in IDRC that were a group of techies, and sometimes even when there were chairs, they preferred to sit on the ground. So I find it kind of fascinating. But let's take 3 or 4 questions at a time. Please identify yourself briefly. We'll take 3 or 4, and then we'll put them to the panelists. So please, in the front row.
Very keen to ask a question. Is it on? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Martin, for being so gracious. Helen Derbyshire from Access Info Europe. I have a very specific question, and it's something I want to know whether the working group has discussed or whether you will put it on your agenda. And that's about, I think Secretary Naser mentioned it, the charging for databases, for data sets. I'll just take one example, but there are multiple examples in the European region and I'm sure elsewhere in the world. My organization, Access Info, just requested the companies registers in 30 countries around Europe using the Freedom of Information laws. Not in the UK, because we knew that it was about to be opened up, well, hopefully, but in many other countries. We've been told we can, yes, have the data, and we've been offered prices which range from Macedonia, 10,000 euros, to the Netherlands, 75,000 euros. Now, I haven't been able to open the Open Data Barometer yet because it's still downloading the PDF. But the Open Data Census, which has a number of countries online, actually does take into consideration whether or not one has to pay for the data set, but interestingly says, take the Netherlands data set, company register, says yes, it's publicly available, but yes, it's charged for. I don't see, from an access to information perspective, we haven't got 75,000 euros. The journalist, the investigative journalist who's trying to follow corrupt businesses doesn't have 75,000 euros to buy and surf through the whole data set. So we've got an issue there. We know that there are many bodies linked to government which have their economic model which is based on charging. Someone told me that from the Hungarian mapping agency said if I stopped charging I'd have to fire everyone tomorrow. There's clearly not a short-term solution to this, but if we're really going to get some key data sets opened up, it's a problem we need to address. And what I haven't been hearing in the debates is how we kind of get countries to have a medium-term strategy of moving through the process of stopping charging for this data. And I'd really like to hear more about whether you've considered that, and if not, how do we begin to address that problem? Thank you.
Okay, good. Please go ahead.
Hi, Martin Tisne from the Media Network and the OGP Steering Committee. So my question is, when we push for open by default, effectively what we're doing is we're trying to change a norm, right? Trying to shift a norm. As Prime Minister Cameron mentioned this morning, we had a huge win with the UK presidency of the G8, which is with the G8 Open Data Charter. The government of Canada co-chairs this working group, was part of that push, and I think it's something fabulous and to be cherished. We have an opportunity next year with the G20 being held, the presidency of the G20 being held by the government of Australia, to continue this and to push for the Open Data Charter to effectively be globalized, or at least be applicable to the G20. What is the working group stance on this? And I mean it very specifically because up until now, mostly Open Government Partnership has focused on national level issues and hasn't tackled global standard setting. So there's been national applications of global standards in OGP, like EITI, right, with the US, but there hasn't been a getting together of groups, nations, civil society and governments to agree together on a standard. If you do that, that would be something very new. So that's my question.
Okay, let's take one more and then we'll put it to the panelists. Lady in the second row.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria. I work for UN Development Program in Montenegro. I might have a very basic question, and I apologize for that, but it's very important for me to get your expert advice. So Montenegro is not in the open data movement yet, but I would like my government to get on board. So from you, I would like 3 things. One compelling example of the benefits of open data. Answer to the question how best to engage citizens in open data, and how best to convince the government to get on board. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's begin with the question about charging for data sets. Sir Tim, do you want to start off on that one?
Well, that's a bigger one, not quite as big as the third question, which is all of the entire open data movement. But yes, there is a typical sort of small-mindedness, and I use the term sort of very kind of precisely, which comes when you're in government and you have some data, and you could and typically you've been selling it, and typically, of course, if you published it as a book, you had to sell it because it cost money to make the book. But when you put it on the web, really, it's easier. In fact, it's in a way, if you put it behind a firewall, that's going to cost you money. If you put it on the open web, it's basically going to cost you hardly anything. So a negligible amount. So there's no. But on the other hand, because you've been charging for it, you've got a charging system. So you start charging, and in some cases, people turn to you and say, "Oh, because you're charging for stuff, let's make you put a requirement on you that you're self-sustaining." And that we don't actually, you can be a little piece of government which can run like a little company. We've had a lot of trouble with that model in the UK. And there's a lot of it still out there. The classic historical thing has been the ordinance. Now release some of its data, fortunately, completely openly, but a lot of the hand-drawn maps, which you go walking with, those you have to buy, and so a compromise was come to then. But the problem is that when you release something which is like basic mapping data for the country, which makes the country one in which it's possible to work, possible to play, possible to do business, then. You can't measure the return on investment. You can't measure. You get lots of wonderful stories, anecdotes from people you meet on the train, but saying, "Oh, thank goodness for open data," or "My company wouldn't exist," or "Today would have been hell apart from the fact I had open data." You get these nice stories, but they're not data themselves. Stories are good, but data. But when you try to then go and convince the Treasury, an organisation which tries to make your country make money. Too often you find something which says, okay, we'll make the country make money by making sure each department makes money. And we'll make sure each department makes money by making sure each group within it makes money. And so, by burrowing down, then each group then has to start charging for itself and operating like little companies. Actually, if you're running a country, your job is to look out for the benefit of the country. And if you look at the various reports you can go to, there's a lot of economic evidence that when you make, for example, mapping data, when you make this sort of thing available, then you'll find that the return on investment when it's measured is huge. I remember somebody just recently, yesterday, they told me one interesting example. The Transport for London went to the trouble of putting all the schedule data, all the transport data about when the buses are out there, and the buses and trains out there, and they looked at how much they analysed it in exactly the same way they would analyse it if it was an investment in a faster rail track. So they looked, okay, we have to pay this money for gathering the data and actually going through the trouble of putting it out there, and how does it play back in terms of contrast? Well, they looked at the fact that the actual number of times people used apps. And when they used the app, how they didn't have to go to the website. If they go to the website, they didn't have to go to the ticket office. And they worked out how it made everybody's journey just a little bit shorter. So it was equivalent to investing for every pound they put into open data, it was equivalent to investing, as it turned out, £45. Right? They got back £45 back. So, and the high-speed rail, they're looking at getting £1.5 back in benefit from investing £1. So people are attacking that. But £45, and that is only from looking at the impact where you could measure it on people's impact in making the transport system more efficient. Obviously, there's a whole lot of benefit from people using the maps and so on, so they didn't see. So every now and again, so find the places where people have measured it. Go talk. Obviously. Find friends who are in the same area. Go talk to the folks at the ODI about their war stories with particular departments. I've talked too long about that one, but it's a biggie.
Okay, other panelists, do you want to come in on this question, Secretary Naser?
To be perfectly honest with you, we're just starting with our open data. So our assumption is everything should be available to the public, and therefore our data should not be charged. As far as we're concerned, we're still there yet. We're not part of the debate yet on whether you should be charging for the data that you put out in the website. But however, our data that we've put out in the website, for instance, we are now in the middle of a controversy in our country, we put out the pork barrel of the politicians. Under the previous administration, it turned out that a lot of legislators, senators, as well as congressmen have misused their pork barrel funds. And so that's now a big controversy in our country. Essentially, it's really for us, and so far as we're concerned, we're not in the economic aspect of open data, but more on the fighting graft and corruption thing and making data more accessible to the public, so that part of it also is to better the service of better the public service. So I'm not sure if I can answer that question, but in so far as we're concerned, our position is still that data that is open there, out there in the website should be available free of charge.
Okay, Mr. Darkwa.
Right. I think that countries in developing their access to information bill must be looking at this issue from its global perspective. Ghana has had a challenge of having its bill before the legislature for over 5 years now. What has been the debate? The debate is that there's a school of thought thinking that, data is still an internally generated fund mechanism. There's the school of thought thinking that data is to be given out free to promote investments and create jobs. And indeed, we've made inputs into this discussion, and I think in the current session of Ghana's parliament, we must have this bill passed into an act. And the essence is to move towards the issue that was raised, that data should be made available to all communities. Getting to the global level of issues, I think in my presentation, I talked a little bit about that we must try and avoid regionalism as far as open data is concerned. Yes, we have cases of the EU agreeing on common standards. What about the AU? What about the other regional bodies? What can we do as a working group to make sure that our voices are heard in these regional groups so that they see that we need to move together? Again, I think we can also have partnership agreement with other international bodies which are working towards the same purpose. Like the ITU, for instance, has all the regional groups represented there, and the essence of telecommunication is to ensure access and openness to information. So as we partner these groups, I think we can make impact to get the commitment of governments at all levels. I think this is what we can also do as a group, a working group in that direction to address that concern that was raised about regionalism. Thank you.
Okay, good. Professor Novak, do you want to come in on the issue of charging for data sets and any of the other questions as well?
I actually am going to answer both questions with one answer. My students actually worked last year on exactly this question of the release of corporate registration data, because as you may know, in the United States, we do it at the state level, and so we have 50 different registry systems, none of which release that data as open data, and so I was quite interested in what to do about this. And this is a very specific example, as in the Montenegrin question, of how do I move towards open data, whether it's in the corporate context or in another context. It's very interesting that when you push on these kinds of questions, we tend to assume in our community that it's always some resistance for some principled reason, that if we push hard enough, it will just fall away. And that the argument in this case that the corporate registries are selling the data, in particular to Dun & Bradstreet, and to other information-based businesses, that it's a revenue problem. But when you ask the state registry in Delaware, for example, what the situation is, they're very concerned about people downloading data, pinging their servers, and having the whole agency crash. They're very concerned about the legality and the comprehensiveness of the data, because corporate registration data becomes a basis for trials and for lawsuits, and so they want to make sure the data they put out is reliable. They worry about a problem I'd never even heard of, which is corporate identity theft, the people downloading the data to perpetrate scams against citizens and commit crimes, as well as in the issue we would anticipate of revenue. The point is, when you dig in, it turns out there are a lot of rationales, some more justified, some not, that have to be overcome in order to deal with these issues. So first, what you have to do, you have to give an example of someone else who's done it. You have to point to New Zealand and all the benefits that have had from opening up its corporate registration data, and now, of course, in the UK, which has made tremendous strides in this regard. You have to really get at what are the use cases, because well-intentioned people who say, well, why should I release this data? What is it good for? What could we do with it? When you start to point out how using that data you could create the tools that could help prevent fraud, that could help improve regulatory enforcement, that could help citizens in a given community, not just hurt them. Those use cases are often, those stories are not known or well understood by people, so they resist open data because they don't understand what it's good for. You've got to bring people together, subject matter experts who may be from the community of financial services or corporate data or whatnot, but with the geeks, the students, the academics, the people who are somewhat fearless about identifying creative approaches to understanding what problems you could solve. And finally, I think extremely important, in order to make the case for open data, how best to convince both politicians and citizens in this domain or others, is you have to have both quantifiable evidence of what works, or stories about what's working even before you have evidence. I see over here my colleague in the red dress, Laura Manley, if you would wave, please, from the GovLab. I'm embarrassing her because she is running a project, she's not easily embarrassed, for us called the Open Data 500, where she's working on tracking the stories with 500 companies in the US, and now we're starting in the UK and in Europe, about how they're using open data to create jobs, to create economic growth, but really just to start the conversation about what's working and what's not, because it's through telling those stories that I think you best convince people. So, thank you.
Professor Novak, could I ask you to maybe expand perhaps on some of those compelling examples?
Expand? I'm already...
To get to the question
you
from
don't
the
have to
lady
ask
from
me
Montenegro.
twice.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Concisely expand. I mean, the lady from Montenegro asked for some compelling examples of the benefits of open data, and you highlighted a few in New Zealand and so forth, but could you maybe tell us in a little bit more detail one of the examples that you have?
I think I would defer. I mean, as Tim said, this is the whole story of the movement, so I'm happy to give you lots of favorite examples, but in every sector there's a different one. I wanted to choose this because we asked about the corporate registration sector, a fairly geeky topic to most people. I mean, it's even geeky within the world of data, which is pretty geeky. But the kinds of things that you can do, as we were discussing, I'll tell you I was in the open contracting panel earlier this morning. When you take the corporate registration data and you begin to open it up and make it searchable, as people like Chris Taggart at Open Corporates is doing, and you mash that up with environmental compliance data, workplace safety data, contracting data, the ability to start to see where is fraud being perpetrated, where abuse is being perpetrated, where are we giving government contracts time and time again to companies who are mistreating their workers because previously we haven't been able to mash up or compare these corporate data registration databases with the regulatory compliance databases. This is just one example. I could go on at great length, and I think other people here could too, about the ways in which health and wellness have been improved, education has been improved, consumer choice has been improved as a result of opening up data. So I think the important thing is to start, the thing I would advise to the person from Montenegro is you have to start with a problem you care about. Ultimately, again, open data, open government, it's just a tool. It's just a hammer or a screwdriver. What gets people up in the morning, maybe this lovely lady in the front row gets up in the morning because of because of corporate registration data, but Martin doesn't get up because of corporate registration data. I don't know what gets you out of bed in the morning, something to do with accountability in far-flung places of the world, and José is interested in something utterly different. This person is healthcare and this person is transport. The important thing is to start with the thing that matters to you, or more importantly, that matters to the politicians you have to convince, schools, roads, healthcare, and then to figure out how you use the tool to help accomplish that better.
Good. So we have about 5 more minutes in the Q&A session. I see there's a gentleman in the back. Please go ahead. And then the other gentleman with the yellow tie.
Thank you. My name is Benjamin Hertzberg. I'm from the World Bank. I'll be presenting tomorrow on a session on open private sector. First, I'd like to point people asking about opening of corporate registry that there is an application now called the Open Company Data Index at registries.opencorporates.com, which the World Bank has sponsored, with all the OGP countries rated on the openness of their corporate registries and how much free the data is and so on and so forth. Second, we are talking very much about government data here, but much of the data in the world is not in government hands, it's in the private sector's hands. And so I would like to rebound on this issue of monetization of data, because we seem to assume that on the government side, data is free, but then on the private sector side, we have no problem for the data to be for pay. And so we got to reconcile those two things. And when we talk about the private sector, we got tons of information in supply chain information, traceability information, feedback from consumers information, corporate information. There is a lot of information there on contracting and so on. So how do we take this open data agenda to the private sector in a way that makes sense to them, that fits their business processes, and it's not for the greater good of the citizens, but it's for the greater good of my bottom line. Because if we don't engage them for the greater good of their bottom line, it's not going to work. Thank you.
Okay, good, thank you. Please go ahead. Could we pass the microphone to the man in the yellow tie, please?
Hi, everyone. Nick Sinai, U.S. Chief Technology Officer. Just wanted to say that as part of our preview plan of our second National Action Plan, we actually have a series of open data commitments in there. In fact, a really exciting one on agriculture and nutrition data, GoDan, a great partnership with the UK government, and 44 other organizations, including academia, a number of civil society and corporations. And I guess that leads into my second point, is we have to be very concrete about the use of data. When you're talking about the opening up government data anyways, it can be very, the average civil servant can see the costs and the risk of opening up data, but the benefits can be very abstract. In fact, I hear a lot of abstract talking, and so we have to be very specific about the examples. And so, for example, a company like Climate Corporation, this is a US-based startup, Google engineers, 2006, and they make apps for farmers, and they provide weather insurance for farmers. And this helps farmers in the middle of the country actually be more profitable and lets them plant high-risk crops like blueberries. And I like blueberries. And it turns out that this particular company has created a couple hundred jobs, has helped farmers across 50 states, and just got sold for $1 billion. So that's real job creation, real wealth creation, and has helped real farmers. And I get more blueberries. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to turn it back to the panelists. In a sense, the question that the gentleman from the World Bank asked about how do you take this agenda to the private sector in a way that they'll understand will help their bottom line, the CTO for the White House has just answered that question. But let's take it to the panelists as well. Sir Tim, do you have a perspective on that question about the private sector?
In fact, there's a lot of parallels, more parallels perhaps than your corporates might realize between the private sector and the government sector. One way, think about within a corporation, first of all. So you're running an organization, and a lot of CEOs understand they need enterprise information integration because, or enterprise application integration, EIA is big topic. Companies provide it because if you're CEO of a company, and you can't just basically make a query across all the databases in the company, then how are you going to be able to make decisions? How are you going to know what the state of the company is? So there's an understanding that within a corporation that you need to have this transparency of data, otherwise the company is in trouble. So, and of course, when you have mergers and acquisitions, this involves some pain because people have to agree on sort of then discover standards which allow them to talk within the larger whole. But people generally, corporate folks understand that. So then if you look at, and so one of the ways of explaining why you need open data within a country is to say, well, look at the countries. Imagine that you're thinking about it as being CEO of a country. You've got all these different parts of it running. Wouldn't you need enterprise integration across the country? So obviously it's stupid for a country to have one part of the department of the government working on things and a bunch of civil society working on things, and for them to just not share the state of the world. So that's, in a way, that sometimes sort of works for helping with somebody with a corporate mindset to understand why it's important to have it on the national scale. But then also you can step back and you can say, well, you know, some companies start off as little companies up and down the supply chain, and then they merge. But really nothing's changed. So if you might, within your company, of course it's you want data transparency, but think of what about the community of your company and all its suppliers, the whole community, all the people you deal with all the time, all these, you know, you go and no longer are you negotiating with them by playing golf so much, because actually everybody, your staff are going to their websites, and more actually it's computer programs which are actually doing the negotiation because they've arranged to pull in data feeds. If you are operating in the larger community, think of the larger community as a big company. Same thing applies. If within the sector, if you don't have up and down the supply chain the same visibility, the same transparency, you're not going to be able to compete with the same thing in another country or with a similar sector. For example, you're going to lose out of. So that just as it's an optimize, you have to look at yourself not as just composed of modules to see, you know, which tells you that you must have internal data transparency. You must realize that your company is module in a larger system. Applying, you know, looking at it philosophically that way, you see logically the same thing has got to apply, and you'll realize that in the future, companies which are not communicating with other companies with data flows and being open about their stock levels and their and the compatibility of their electronic components with other components and sort of things like that, they'll just be too much of a pain to deal with. And so after a while, you just won't exist.
Okay, so thank you, Sir Tim. I have the difficult job of having to sort of close down the discussion because we're nearly at the end of the session. But the co-chairs for the Open Data Working Group asked me to just give you a sense of how the first meeting went yesterday. So the Government of Canada and the Web Foundation are the co-chairs of the Open Data Working Group. The first meeting was held yesterday, and we started off sort of reiterating the objective of the Open Data Working Group, which is really, like all the other working groups, is to help the members of the OGP develop action plans, develop commitments, implement their commitments. And the meeting was very useful. It was a first meeting. We had a lot of rich discussion. We separated into sort of 4 themes, and we talked about measuring impact, about standards, and I'm sorry we didn't quite get to your question about standards, but we'll have to continue the discussion in the corridors. We talked about capacity building and guidelines and policies. And in terms of next steps, because we really started just discussing these issues, the group is going to probably virtually have a webinar in a few weeks, identify how it wants to work, how often it'll meet, whether it'll break into regional groups and then come back face to face, address issues of governance, how the working group will be governed, develop a work plan of something that's, because we discuss so many topics, things that are achievable within a year or so, achievable but also useful and realistic. So if you have more questions about that, if you want to join the working group, then José Ma and Stephen, who are sitting right here in the front, please come and approach them. It may be, yeah. There we go. We have the emails of the 2 co-chairs up on the screens.
So they can see your face.
Yeah. Good. So that's the working group. So in closing then, first I think I'd like to thank all of you for your participation. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions and comments, but I'd also like all of you to join me in giving a very, very warm sense of thanks to our panelists up here for this wonderful session. Thank you very much.